when we fall into these flashy hype tech cycles, and unravel, again, first principles, we go back to what are the human conditions that deal with this technology? And if we can't figure that out, it doesn't work.
Welcome to the / podcast, where we lean into the future of IT by inviting fellow thought leaders, innovators, and problem solvers to slash through its complexity. I am your host, James Carman, and it is my distinct pleasure of welcoming our guest today, John Willis. John Willis is a longtime technology leader and one of the early pioneers of the DevOps movement, helping shape DevOps days in its early years and influencing how organizations think about modern software delivery. He wrote a little book called The DevOps Handbook with a few other folks that you probably have heard of. His work today focuses on the intersection of AI, security, and infrastructure, specifically how to design systems that operate safely under autonomous conditions. He specializes in deterministic governance, building control planes that enforce policy, managing risk, and ensuring reliability in AI-driven and cyber-physical systems. John has led federal security architecture initiatives, contributed to zero trust strategy, and worked extensively in the regulated environments where system failure is not an option. We had such a great conversation going on that we had to break this episode into two parts. This is part one. I hope you enjoy. Welcome to the / John.
James, I always say thank you. I always say the banks are where the money is, right? So that's the fun play. If you, out of everything you described to me, that's, I love working with banks, but regulated industries is really my sort of, I just find that the most fascinating place to hone our craft, if you will.
Yeah, it's where the hard problems are. It's where the bad guys are trying to get in, and
That's right.
you got to be good at what you do. Yeah. I said before I read your bio that it was my distinct pleasure. It's not often that I get to talk to somebody that I have been recommending their books for years, and so you are the author, one of the authors, the co-authors of the DevOps Handbook. And for years, I've been telling people when we're talking about DevOps with clients and just talking with anyone about DevOps, they ask me for advice. I say, number one, read Accelerate by Dr. Forsgren et al. And that is going to tell you why. And then when you want to know how, you pick up the DevOps Handbook. And I've been telling people that for years and years and years. So I'm really happy to have you on the show and really excited about the conversation today.
Yeah, no, what's amazing is that book still holds, right?
Yeah.
There's very few books you can say that were written, that long ago. I lose count now where it was, but probably around 2010, 11, 12, I don't know. That still can read it, especially in the technology space, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's still, we did second edition with Nicole being additive to it. But yeah, it's still the original stories all.
Absolutely. Timeless classic. So, okay, I would be remiss. So this is something that comes up in our work at Calibrity. When meeting with clients, and then they say, okay, we want to do some DevOps stuff, or do you have DevOps folks? Do you have to bring us some DevOps guys or gals, right? That's what they say.
Sure.
And of course, we have to preach, and we say, okay, that's not really kind of what the vibe is here. But I've got one of the pioneers in the movement, and I would be remiss if I did not ask you, what is your definition? If you had to just lay it out there crisply, what is the definition of DevOps?
Yeah, definitions are dangerous, right? So, and they become abstractions that kind of get in the way. Same thing. What you're describing is a customer's abstraction of what they think they want, and you're rightfully so saying, no, wait, can we decouple what you really want, right? So the danger is, but I will say that Adam Jacob, who, was the founder of Chef, and I went to work, I was like the 7th or 8th person in there. I was the old guy they hired. And I think he's since changed his definition, but I like his original definition, which is it's a professional and cultural movement.
Yeah.
Full stop. Right.
I
think you can then sort of break that down in so many areas that are just not easily compiled into one sentence.
Yeah. That's culture is usually where I kind of start talking with people. This is more of a culture or a mindset shift for you. It's not about pipelines and I know Jenkins or I know how to do GitHub Actions. That's not DevOps. That's a component.
It's the decoupling of all the things, right?
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're not necessarily going to talk all about DevOps. Of course, we'll talk about some of it. But tell us a little bit about I do want to hear a little bit of backstory, a little bit of history. You're one of the DevOps guys, right? So how did this come to be for you? How did this
Ah,
lead up to
yeah, yeah.
you being involved in that book
Yeah,
and this
yeah.
movement?
No, what's interesting, I guess, the sort of the shortest version of the long version is I've been doing this stuff for over 5 decades, right? I mean, very long time. I've seen, like, I would say 5 decades of transformational technology shifts, right? And, take the whole podcast, to go through them. But as I get older, right, you can do the math, how old you might think I am, is I start thinking about, like, what am I, right? And I've done coding projects but in the end of the day, maybe on my tombstone was he was an ops person, the O in DevOps.
Hmm.
And then I think about what does that mean to me? Like, I'm a technologist like you, right? We see new technology, we geek out, we play with it. I start thinking about what it means for me, what does it mean for my business opportunities. But the thing I go really quick is what I think as I think about my career is what do ops people, what does ops mean to me, and what does it mean really to sort of if there is a classification or a group of operations. We protect the brand. I mean, like at the end of the day, that's what we do. In fact, I always used to tell this joke back in the early cloud days, like we're like cicadas, or the early agile days. I think that was the best. Like we fell asleep, we woke up and like, what in the heck have they done now? And we roll up our sleeves and we try to fuse okay, that's great. I mean, I love that you're doing that, but like, have you thought about maybe doing it this way? Because, like, when you do it that way, like, you could destroy the brand, right? And, 'cause,
Hmm.
I mean, at the end of the day, doesn't matter whether you're nonprofit, profit, like, your brand is what you are, right?
Yeah. It's almost like you're like a loss prevention person, for the brand, right? Like that's what the ops people are, kind of like the loss prevention uh, officers of the organization. I love it. Now, one thing that's interesting about, and as you said, you've been around technology for a while. You've seen these things happen and these shifts and these swings and all of this. Um, are the pattern is typically, it follows the hype cycle, right? We find something new and shiny, and we're like, oh my goodness, this is the next best thing. It's going to solve all the problems, and then then it starts to wane, and then people are like, 5 years later, they're like, oh well, that was the dumbest thing we ever did in our lives, right? Maybe not quite that much microservices.
Yeah, yeah.
You've got all of the cryptocurrency stuff. All of that, the blockchain, all of these kind of movements. They kind of follow the same pattern. But I don't think DevOps itself has. I think it's kind of been slowly just growing. It's getting tweaked here and there. I think
Yeah, yeah.
with platform engineering, we've got another kind of evolution of it now. Is that how you would characterize that?
I think, yeah. I mean, there's the DevOps is dead, platform engineering. I've had the arguments of serverless is we don't need DevOps anymore because, like I mean, one of the problems with DevOps in general was, and that's why when you asked my definition, I went to the sort of most sort of common version of. I mean, if you think about the steward of DevOps, it's Patrick DeBar, right? And I always people say, John, you're the godfather of DevOps. I'm like, yeah, I'm the consigliere. Patrick is the godfather. And he did this beautiful thing, right, where he said, I'm not going to tell you all how to do it. Kind of like Linus Torvalds in a way, right? Like, although even better because he literally let the thing flourish, but he tapped it on the shoulder periodically, right?
Mhm.
But the thing is where we get lost is where we start thinking that the abstraction means more than basically the abstraction term,
Mhm.
right? And like you said earlier, like some people would think it's CI/CD or um. So the thing about like DevOps in general is if you think about it as the cultural and professional movement and how it helps guide us, then it's easier to sort of think about the primitives. Like I loved your article on the autonomy paradox.
Oh, thank
When
you.
we first met, you pointed it to me, and I read it, and I think it sort of resonated so well with me because you sound more like a developer, a coder, architect of software systems. I'm not immune to those concepts, but again, I think about how do you operationalize things. But I mean, I would use sort of different. I would say DevOps. You say microservices, NoSQL, things like that are these patterns. And a good friend of mine, Chris Brown, who I worked with at Chef, and he'd always say, like, John, when you squeeze the balloon, the oxygen just moves somewhere else in the balloon, right? And I think that's the sort of the point you were making, among other points. And I think of it as all these things, the DevOps, the DevSecOps, the Lean, the Agile, but certainly microservices, certainly NoSQL. I lived through that, right?
Hmm.
They're all great things, but we can't overemphasize the technology. And I think the thing I think about a lot these days is when people start thinking about innovation patterns, like, the diffusion of innovation or crossing the chasm. I think that's the wrong way to think about it. I think about J curves.
Hmm.
And J curves are these sort of like we start out with this enthusiasm, we fall into this sort of bottom of the J and we grind. So when people talk about it's failing or it's not working or no, we're learning. In the messy middle of the bottom of the J is where we learn and where we decipher, and if we're really clever, we use first principles and we don't just sort of cut and paste the technology as what somebody said about like to your point, people say, hey, I want a DevOps person.
Hmm.
No, no, I'm like, yeah, well, what do you really want? So, yeah, again, I think the lessons learned here are the patterns of things that are consistent. And when we use the term social technical, and it's a great term, but I think we don't really decouple what that means. It means that the humans, when we put it in the context of AI, right? Machines don't control humans, and humans don't control machines. But we could say technology doesn't control humans, and humans don't control technology. They really don't.
Hmm.
I mean, we know this. Like we think we control it, but it's sort of like whether it's AI or pre-AI, it often takes a life of its own, right?
Absolutely. I love how you phrase that. That it's more of a learning cycle
That's right.
than a hype cycle, I guess. And I guess I don't know, if it's unfortunate or if it's just the way it is, but like our lab, if you will, for where we learn and we get that feedback,
Uh-huh,
those feedback
uh-huh. Yeah,
loops that are so important, obviously, for learning, is like in real world systems that we're building to
yeah,
run our world in tech with technology, and then eventually we learn, okay, that didn't work so well. But it's funny how these cycles we don't approach them as like let's learn, that we
yeah.
kind of
Yeah, no,
take off, we go off to the races.
yeah, we keep forgetting that, like the MIT thing about AI is failing, learning is failing,
Yeah.
failing is learning. Like, so what we should have looked at that instead of like, oh, see, I told you it wasn't going to work, as
Right.
opposed to we need to learn how to make it work. Like and like that's a 100-year-old message. We'll talk about Deming, if you will. I
Sure.
love, but Deming, Russell Acuff. I mean, it's just a body of work that teaches us that, learning is critical and you only learn through failure. I use this, sort of a lot when people are like, I don't know if it's outdated. It'll be like, when somebody finally really does cure cancer, it's going to be billions of failures that
Yeah.
got us there, right? Like,
Absolutely.
and is that bad? No.
Yeah, was it Edison said, I didn't fail 1,000 times. I learned 1,000
Yeah,
ways
there
it
you go.
didn't
Yeah,
work,
yeah.
how to build a
Right.
light bulb or whatever, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I did a
Totally.
talk, we have a high school group here in town that does a technology group, Interalliance, and I did a talk for them. I called it, "Failing to Succeed,"
There
because
you go.
kids these days are just the
Oh,
emphasis
yeah,
on
yeah, yeah,
being perfect. I mean, everybody's
yeah.
GPA is coming out of high school over
Oh,
4, and
it's a
stuff like
mess.
that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a
They always have
mess.
to be perfect, and they're just so it's an anxiety that these kids have, and they don't understand that you've gotta fail to learn. That's how you learn, is by failing.
Yeah. Well,
Uh,
it's funny because where it gets me going is somebody like, a problem with AI is it doesn't introduce the kids to critical thinking. I'm like, okay, hold on a second. I've done a lot of research. I put my two boys through college over the last 10 to 15 years, and I did a lot of research on every stage from advanced high school and I don't think there's a whole lot of critical thinking in those systems as they exist today. So if you're gonna before you try to fix AI, fix the critical thinking part first, and then we can have that discussion about what critical thinking means in
I
AI.
think it's you hit the nail on the head. I mean, I think that critical thinking stopped for some
Yeah,
reason. I think
yeah,
we used to talk about that.
yeah,
So okay, so you brought up Deming. I'm fascinated. It's interesting. Like your latest book is about Deming, and I do a lot of reading, and you don't see people overtly talking about Deming, but when you read people's books, it's like you're saying Deming's words and Deming's
yeah.
principles, and you're parroting his principles. but you're not acknowledging where they're coming from. And maybe they don't know. It's not intentional. It's just
Yeah.
everybody's been inspired by these things. They've been around for a long time. So how do you think, those principles, made their way through kind of our evolution of software engineering? Are we
Yeah, no, they're
following kind of that path?
fundamental. I mean, the shortest version of a really long version is, in really the first DevOps days in America. I was the only American at first DevOps days in Ghent. And then the first one here, we had an open space discussion about theory of constraints and some of the lean concepts. And the
Hmm.
gentleman, a good friend of mine, literally started, talking about, well, John, have you heard about Deming? And I'm like, no, who's Deming? He's like, oh man, you know, go, here's your homework assignment. And I read the Deming's 14 points, which is just a surface view of the complexity that exists in his body of work. And it was like, oh my God, almost every one of those items is like things we talk about in DevOps. And that
Hmm.
started this 10-year quest for me to understand who was this person. And what I basically came to decide in the most simplistic thread is you have like this non-determinist, a physicist that's coming out during the, the last scientific revolution, which is quantum, although he wasn't a quantum physicist, thinking in non-deterministic ways, who's sort of driving a completely different way to think about organizational behavior that literally seeds deeply into what Toyota did. I mean, he
Hmm.
literally worked with Toyota, which then gets categorized and colorized as lean here, which
Hmm.
then Mary Poppendieck, I've interviewed her, talks about Deming and lean, which becomes lean software development. And then, Bob's your uncle and the rest, So yeah, no, it's a fun, the principle, and it's not just him. I mean, there are, Akoff, Senge, I mean, we can go down the list, but the body of work that we continually ignore when we fall into these flashy hype tech cycles, and unravel again, first principles, we go back to what are the human conditions that deal with this technology. And if we can't figure that out, it doesn't work. Like the J curve. The J curve is the ultimate atom smasher, hydrogen collider for humans and technology,
Yeah.
right? That's where we're trying to figure out, like, how, all right, well, this part of the team does want to do it. This part of the organization doesn't want to do it. Like, it's not just, like the innovation cycles of like, we're here now. We're here now. You're never here. You know, you're in a gazillion places, So, yeah.
Right. So our evolution, as you said, it's following these patterns, these fundamental principles. And now we come to, and we've kind of hinted at it so far, and the elephant in the room obviously is AI. So now we're here. Well, we think we're here. We're here and we're here and we're
We're
here. We're
somewhere.
all over the place. We're
We're
somewhere.
somewhere. Yeah, yeah, we're
We may
somewhere.
be multiple here's right now.
We're
Schrodinger may
quantum.
say, you don't
We're
know
the
where you
super
are.
bizarre.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're in some flavor of superposition. So how do we take all of those lessons that we should have been learning all along and maybe do it right this time with AI? What's the secret here? How do we do AI right according to those principles?
Yeah, I think the thing is, and I like to use the phrase first principles a lot, but I think the thing that when you sort of there's this idea. So my second to last book was my Deming's Journey to Profound Knowledge, which is very sort of appropriate for how to think about organizational behavior in these technology flashes, if you will. My recent book is Rebels Reason, which is history of AI. And what's interesting is they really sort of dovetail very nicely with each other. You know, I think when people talk about like AI winters or AI springs, or John, do you think that we're going to have, an AI winter, or is there going to be a crash to LLMs and all that? And I think those are the wrong questions. Right? I think the thing I like to think about the metaphor is more of fluorescence. And fluorescence is this body of energy that sort of like turns into, so the energy emits, it turns into this flashy thing, it blinds us all. And then it sort of dissipates, and then it sort of does it again. So it's like it's carrying forward. So the thing we sort of miss is, hey, we're in this blind spot right now. We are. I myself, I'm in it, right? I
Uh-huh.
keep sort of correcting, well, is this time really the one that's going to be different than all other times? And instinctively, I know it never is, right? But like we're in this. It's so new. It's so different. It's so enticing. But the more we can step back, the critical thinking or the first principle thinking is walk it back and say, what if this is just a cycle? Like, again, I think, I really liked your article because I think that's a good way to think about. Like, yeah, we're more likely in the cycle. If we're not, hey, we hedged our bet. But if we're in the cycle, then what are the principles that the things that we do correctly in every other cycle or fluorescence?
Hmm.
And yes, maybe LLMs will hit the bend, as they call it, where like it'll start getting stale, and and there's even some minor signs of this, but there's other signs that there aren't. But then what's next? And what we're gonna do, the fluorescence is gonna the energy is gonna stay, and we're gonna sort of and I think the more we d like, I think, again, we're going back to your sort of, like, monolith to microservices to, like, "Oh my god, maybe that didn't work the way we thought it should." That was all learning. That
Absolutely.
nothing's lost there. I mean, microservices added value and has added value to our industry as all industries as a whole,
Absolutely. We learned a
unquestionably,
lot
right?
of
Yes.
patterns and how to
Exactly,
build
right.
resilient software. I mean, we learned a ton from microservices.
That's right, that's right. So, yeah, again, I guess my answer is that, like, long as we can think about these as sort of like the energy is there, we're constantly moving forward, and then we have to sort of decouple the logic behind what the blindness of the energy. I know I'm getting crazy metaphoric here,
No, I like it. I
yeah,
like it.
but yeah, so
So you brought it up like the AI winters. There've been a couple, and so I'm sure that when Rosenblatt came out with the perceptron back in the day, and he had all these claims, he thought he was in that
I'm
fluorescence, like they
sure
and they were, but they did they think like, okay, this is the end, but then they realized, you can't we can't do this at scale, and then it kind of died off, and then we figured out back propagation with the chain rule and all
sure,
that, and
yeah,
then
yeah,
it
yeah, yeah,
came
yeah,
back again, and
yeah.
in the '80s. And then it died off because we didn't have enough data to do the training,
Oh,
and then
yeah,
it
yeah.
kind of came back
You're
again. And
basically describing my book, by the way, right now.
oh well,
My
I'm gonna.
Rebels of Reason book,
I want
which,
to read it. I
yeah,
wrote.
I
I do a talk on this, and
okay, now you'd
yeah,
love my book. I mean, I actually start with Aristotle, just a little bit about formulated logic, which gets to Boole, who turns that into math, which Turing turns it into the concept of a computer, which, in between there, very important, Ada Lovelace creates the
yes,
concept of a program. Turing creates the concept of a computer. McCulloch and Pitts
yep,
described the first neural network.
hmm,
And then Rosenblatt creates the first sort of working version of a neural network.
hmm,
And then Minsky basically says it's not going to work, and for all the wrong reasons. And then you're right. Then we move into the '80s with backpropagation and Hinton and LeCun and yeah, and again, that's the great. I didn't use. Somebody mentioned the idea of fluorescence after I wrote my book. I would have totally used that instead of AI winters and AI springs, because it exactly is this fluorescence of energy that Rosenblatt creates the perceptron, a single layer
hmm,
neural network. And it literally is brilliant because he's taken Pitts and McCullough's work, and he's like, actually, I think the original example, if my memory's right, is to determine whether a punch card has punch holes on the left or the right hand side. I mean, it was that simple today, like, whoa,
right,
but like to be able to use a neural network to determine that was like insanely, and using an early IBM literally computer to do that, right? Like that was really cool. And then, but that was like, okay, yeah, that's great, but how are you going to basically, right, create pictures of the Mona Lisa, although nobody was asking that back then. But then people like Hinton and LeCun, and then the data, Fei Li, right?
yeah.
I cover a lot about Fei Li's importance in this. But yeah, no, but yeah, I think it definitely points out the social, technical, the human elements, and the energy that just keeps rolling forward.
Bob Martin was doing a book on the history of like computing and stuff, and we kind of went back and forth, I think, on Twitter or where somewhere about like the fact that you brought up Lovelace, Ada Lovelace, and it's so funny, her connection, like it's so weird to think about, like she is part of the computing history, but like her father is Lord Byron, the
I know,
poet,
I
like
cover all
that
that.
is like
So one of the things I do
mind
in my
blowing.
yeah, what I do in my books is I try to take a Michael Lewis-like approach.
Okay,
I love the way he writes books. They're sort of biographies, they're sort of history stories, but they're very human telling. And I really love that style. I did it in my Deming book, and then I did it again. And so, yeah, I mean, not only was her father, Lord Bryan, like he wanted her to marry up. The
uh-huh.
mother was this subversive activity of making sure she learned math. And then what was also interesting, she was such a brilliant mathematician. She actually wrote algorithms to try to figure out how to beat the horses. So she was a sort of a serious gambler. So yeah, so that's the way I love to tell stories about people, is not only what they contributed and the technology they contributed, but like there's these human stories around it. And that's such a joy to write, sort of technology history stories to the human. Yeah. So yeah, she's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, and we're all over the place, but we're having a good time. Okay,
Well,
so
like, so since we're here, the other thing too, I will say this, well, I don't know. I'm pretty sure nobody else has included Grace Hopper in the history of AI book.
okay,
Well,
all
because
right,
the thing was, she was the first sort of COBOL was basically the first sort of, version of turning bits and bytes into natural language,
yep,
right?
mhm.
Like, and that's important. I mean, it doesn't show up in most people's timeline, but the idea that there's this evolution of like wrangling bits and bytes with abstractions that are more human telling, right? That's a sort of a, there's even the early Fortrans and certainly assembler were very sort of, they weren't, I mean, I hated COBOL, but for all those reasons,
But you
but
could read it. It was
yeah, you
natural
can
language.
read it.
COBOL's
Yeah.
very
People just
readable.
say, if you want to write a program, write it in assembler. If you want to read a program, write it in COBOL.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, assembler was very much oriented for, like, the computer can be able to read this, but COBOL was
That's
more
right. Yeah.
more
Yeah. Yeah.
that was
Yeah.
the turn of where we started writing languages for humans. All right, that's fa I can't wait to read your book now, and I'm sorry, I thought your latest book was the Deming one. I didn't know you had the history one. Now I gotta buy that one too.
Yeah, the problem is people don't read books anymore. Not yeah, I'm not saying you. Is like it's a tough gig right now to write.
Oh, yeah.
So you do it for your own self satisfaction, not to make any
I
money.
love the physical copy. I'm a physical book
Yeah,
guy.
me too. Me too.
All right, so we've talked about the AI winters, and now we're in this kind of renaissance of AI again for the third time, and we're in the fluorescence
Uh-huh.
phase. Do we
Uh-huh.
feel? And you said you don't know, and there's some hints of things that fluorescence starting to fade. What are the hints that you've seen in the market right now? What
I
you're
mean,
seeing?
it's really confusing. And, I would probably go on to say I'm not as qualified enough to really sort of. I mean, I'm in this like, okay, I'm just waiting. I would say that I think what's interesting on the tail of that is what LeCun's doing with JEPA and Feifei Li's doing with the New World 3D stuff, right? But I think again, marks are terrible. I think comparing machines to humans is a bad idea.
Mhm.
So if we go by, I don't like using benchmarks as a benchmarks. So like, it's hard to really tell. There are certain things, the reasoning is getting scary,
Mm.
right? If we look at like, what's going on with Mythos, and it wasn't even Mythos, Opus 4.6 was already finding 30-year-old NFS stack um, timeout issues, right? And then, the Mythos supposedly is finding, TCPI stack, 20 years. I love writing LinkedIn is like, I wrote that patch, it's kind of funny if the guy pops up who actually like submitted that, like, and it was before it's finding, it's just like so insane that it's finding, bugs that it actually can't even create a patch for because they're not really in Git, or GitHub structure.
Right,
Right?
yeah.
But yeah, so that's like doesn't seem to be slowing down. I think some of the complaints now about maybe the Opus models are not as good as they were in coding. I think that here's the question: it's like it's inevitable that we're going to hit a bend. Yeah, that I'm pretty certain of. Is it 6 months from now? Is it 2 years from now? Is it 5 years from now? Don't know. Right? But when we do hit the bend, a lot of stuff's going to it's going to be an earthquake, right? It's going to be an earthquake, right? Because this insanity investment and tooling and, I do a ton of research now with AI, which is like puts me in a place where I'm sure everybody does, right? But like my memory is like, I have this beautiful memory now, which is rag everything I've ever done. But I keep thinking about it every time I'm like, oh, that was great. It helped me dissect this or do this. I keep thinking, man, I hope they freeze this version of the model.
Do you
Hope
do you
in
notice,
five
like,
years
week
from
to
now,
week?
I could still use this model in case the
Yeah.
other ones go stale.
Do you find that week to week that I've talked with other guests about this, and it seems to be like the models go through like this like phase where they're just in a bad mood or something, and
Yeah,
they
yeah,
like
yeah.
for a couple of days, it's like, "What are you doing? Why do I have to keep telling you this?" And then everything settles again. I'm like, "What is
Well,
going on?"
I did this podcast with, I love Josh Long, right? Like, he's, yeah, so he's just I won't we'll get yelled at if I go tell my story how I met Josh, but it's a fun story for another maybe over beers or something someday,
Okay, yeah.
but I love him, he's just, he's funny, witty, and he was here in Atlanta, and we got together, and then we did a podcast, and I asked him, because I was concerned about, like, Java, like, what does all this mean when everybody's saying you don't have to really code anymore, and I'm watching him give a demo about, like, where he's just a wizard, he's got Spring, and somebody's like, "I think he did" "Oh, hold on," and he's turning knobs, and I'm thinking, "What does it take a junior programmer to become Josh? And will that be the thing we have to do anymore? Like, is that?" And so we had a long conversation about those kind of things. And, the one thing, he talked about using AI, and what he said, and this I find the same thing, like whether it's behaving badly or not on a particular day, but this is certainly true, is there are certain things, like the easy things, this is the cliche, the easy things are like brilliant, right? Like the stuff that, like, I would have wasted like an hour to do.
Uh-huh.
But what I find is the things that where I know there's a better answer, and this is what he said about coding. So he says, "I use it a lot for coding, except I find more often than not on the hard problems, the sort of the back end, that's maybe the 20% stuff, right? I'm better off just doing it myself because I spend more time wrestling with AI. I'm sure you have this experience too, of making it do what that I know better, right? And the truth is, the models are learning from the average of the corpus of all the data. They're not
Uh-huh.
learning specifically from you, and Josh Long, and all, the people who have done this successfully for many years,
Right.
right? So I think that's the thing you just have to understand is take the good, which is the tedious, the things that like that, the memory that like help me figure a pithy way to say this. But then when I'm trying to construct an article, I have to really sort of arm wrestle and ultimately have to rewrite most of it myself.
Yeah, I have found it refreshing to see, folks like you and me and Josh and Uncle Bob. I see a lot of the kind of the pioneers of they've been around a while kind of folks, right? And even some of the pioneers, like people who write the clean code book, right? Uncle
Yeah,
Bob.
yeah, sure, sure.
They're embracing
Yeah,
AI.
no,
I
yeah,
thought
yeah,
for
yeah.
sure that
Yeah, yeah,
that
yeah,
us
yeah,
older folks, or us old farts, would be
yeah,
like,
yeah, 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 yeah.
"Oh, we're not
No.
doing that. Get off my lawn." We're
That
not doing that. But I think it's
that's the
liberating.
most
I
telling
love it.
sign is a year ago. If we go back and I'll just make it simple, a year ago, there were a lot of people who I feel have way more, especially in the coding area, who I revere, who were on the fence,
Uh-huh.
and almost none of them now are on the fence. I mean, when Josh Long says, can say, "I know, I use it,"
Yeah.
and he puts his caveats. Yeah, no, I think that's if there's any interesting about, like, if they're hearing you, they're hearing me, they're hearing Bob Martin or hearing Josh Long, that yeah, code assistance, AI code assistant is here. Being in denial mode is probably not the right approach right now.
Well, we do have a segment of the show that comes up next that we call "Ship It or Skip It."
ship or skip. Everybody, we gotta tell us if you ship or skip.
And so this segment is kind of like our hot or not kind of a thing. And so we come up with topics and we just say, do you like this idea? Let's ship it. If you don't like it, let's skip it. We had a few that we wrote down. We ask a lot of folks vibe coding, ship it, skip it. And some people redefine it and put their definition of what vibe coding means. And then they say ship it or skip it. Up to you.
All right, if I'm going to have to stick to the strict formula, I'm going to say ship it, and then we'd have to have a long conversation of why I would say ship it. But yeah.
We can back it up. We can actually. So why are you?
Well, because I think the concept of it goes back to that J curve and learning, right? So I think the problem that we have is, I think there was something about this earlier where, like, I love standing in front of an audience of 1,000 people and say, I feel embarrassed in 2026 that I have to say this, but prototype does not equal production, right?
Uh,
And the whole room laughs, but like it's true, right? So
yeah.
the problem is vibe coding is brilliant. It's like even Eric Ries's MVPs, right? Like it's good, except like let's not confuse that with operationalization,
Right.
right? And in a huge fan of learning, vibe research, vibe coding, like that concept is awesome. The place we get, like maybe we sort of shortcut or cut through and the bigger fear is when the business thinks that they can just eliminate people like you because, oh, well, I can just, like, I got Claude Flow on steroids, this is vibe coding. Why don't I just have the business generate the solutions? Right. And
Yeah.
like, yeah, that's going to be really scary.
Yeah, I think if vibe code means an undisciplined approach at just,
Yeah.
one-shotting whatever the LLM spits out and YOLO that to prod.
Totally. Yeah.
I'm going to
And
skip it on that.
we'll
But
skip it big time. Yep.
yeah, so and that brings up another topic. So the second one is kind of this idea of it's phrased different ways, like the citizen developers,
Yeah.
business technologists. So the uninitiated, as you said, business people doing the coding, right? What are your thoughts on that
Yeah, I
concept?
think we need to prepare for it. I think we need to prepare. I think that this. I'm hearing these stories of, like, I heard a story of CEO of a large top 5 bank where a code assistant vendor came in and asked them, like, what's the project that's been driving you crazy for years? And he said, this one. And they prototyped it. He saw it and he did an ELA. He skipped the CIO. This is a true story. Skipped the CIO. Literally bought a contract with this coding assistant, right? The ROI that like CEOs are going to start looking at their competitors, and CEOs are coding now. Like, I mean, they're like, not they're coding, but they're solving problems on their own. Put it this way. They've never liked us in the first place. Right?
We were a
They've always
necessary
felt
evil.
we were this thing, this albatross that they couldn't get rid of, that we lied to them, that, man, if I could just get, I can't say this out loud, but I just get rid of them. And, like, if they see the light at the tunnel. So then the question then is, how do we basically enforce what we know needs to happen, so when they do that, we make the right things the easy things? You know what I mean? Like, that's the thing. Like, I mean, I'm sorry to say, like, everything we've known. I mean, I've done some advising for a couple of universities, and I have to stand in front of kids that are getting CS degrees and saying, if you're just a coder, they're not going to want you.
Right. You
They're
need to
just
be
not
an
gonna want you.
orchestrator of
You need
AI
there's so
orchestrator.
many up-level skills you're going to have, including specific disciplines. So, yeah, I do think it's inevitable that citizen development is going to roll out in the way that we would think is a disaster. And so then it's our job to basically make sure that we build the scaffolding that enables the conversations and hopefully the actual implementation of the scaffold that protects our organizations.
Well, and I say this tongue in cheek, but I blame kind of this whole new era where coders are now in jeopardy of not having jobs anymore, and robots taking our jobs. I blame it on you and Nicole and Gene. I think it's your fault because, as you said, they never liked us in the first place. And then y'all wrote these books that said,
that's funny.
you need to be nice to these people. And they're like, nope, that's the final straw. Let's have computers do this. Forget it. We're not being nice to these people.
Yeah, so I blame Eric Rees, but yeah.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, because he was the minimal viable product, and, like, that the idea that yeah, no, I think there's some truth in that. I mean, but like, going back to France, we attacked the problems we're sitting on, right? And at that time, there were people before, and some of the early pioneers of DevOps were literally. I used to say, here's the deal: 3 developers decided to create a startup. They had to draw the short straw for who was going to do ops, right? And then the developer got ops, was like, okay, well, this is the way I would do ops. I would literally, I'd write code to write infrastructure. I would do,
Sure.
all that stuff, right? And so the early pioneers in DevOps were really developers doing ops,
right?
Not ops doing. In fact, the first time I heard the story from Luke Knies with Puppet, when he talked about, operations keeping all their stuff in source control, I've documented this. I think even in the DevOps Handbook, but I said that was going to go over, like, in the Led Zeppelin story of how somebody created a Led Zeppelin. It's not going to work. And I was wrong.
Right.
I was wrong. Right. But so they were driving this, and, like, some of us who were driving this sort of the counter, the pushback, which was, yeah, this is great, but, oh boy, we need to sort of start thinking about how we're going to do this at scale. How is an organization DevOps Enterprise Summit by Gene and Gene's Phoenix project was all about, like, how is this going to work in large enterprises, right? And that's the path I took.
Been quite a wild ride.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
All right. And then our final ship it or skip it. So I think we're on citizen developers, ship it because it's kind of an inevitable thing that it's going to happen. But I think we need to do it with eyes wide open.
That's
maybe
right.
arms and eyes wide open. Like,
Totally.
let's welcome it. It's
Like,
innovation.
Don't try to act like it won't happen, because
Yeah.
it will. I mean, like we talked about earlier about how many people we trust their coding ability who like 2 years ago were like never, never, never. A year ago were like, kinda, and now they're all in, right? So I mean, there are certain forces that are just you can't control.
Right. Third topic, and I think we hinted at this a little bit as we were talking through things, but like autonomous agents in the enterprise. I mean, are you gung ho? Are you like let's rock this, or are you like
No,
I
I'm
don't know about
scared to death. I've been for the last year and a half. I've been writing like all these sort of stories about rogue agents and how data gets deleted. And when I tell them, people come up and tell me stories. That you'll love this one. There's but part of it is it's the inevitable story. Like it is going to happen. So
Sure.
let's prepare. But like there's the Replit one, but there the ones that I find is stories people tell me where this guy figured, let me just use Flow. I want to get a list of servers that I need to put some remediation or patching on. I'll do it just to make my life easier. And it was a PCI based control infrastructure. I'll get fire calls, so I'll have root access. And so he thought the agent was going to go ahead and just take the logical human path, which maybe go to the load balancer. Literally, the agent was like, it made a decision. Hey, I got root access. I'm going to Vault. So it literally dumped all the secrets into Claude's open source. So we spent the next week, rotating, and so, another one was somebody like literally was doing some other stuff, but part of the scaffolding was it was going to clone a repo and do some things. And that was just, sort of like table stakes that the agent was going to do, but, he didn't even think about it. Turns out, the agent tried to get clever and use a parm and Git that nobody I've ever talked to use, which is like this inverse filter. And it actually had hallucinate. It knew that it wanted to use this exotic thing, which was when I say, RM dash whatever, go ahead and use, if you have the reverse filter set, it'd be, everything except this, right? But it literally knew to use that. It hallucinated on the parm, so it didn't get the parm right, and it didn't delete the .env file. It deleted everything else but the .env file.
Whoops.
Think about that. That was this incredible engine that had the ability to see all the corpus of anybody's ever used, with some ability of logic to say, why wouldn't I use the more clever way
Right.
to do this? And a human would be like, oh yeah, that would be real dangerous. And like the Vault thing, like what human in a regular environment say, oh, I'll just dump. They would, oh, wait a minute. Like, where are those keys all going to wind up? But the agent didn't care, So yeah, so I think, we got to be really cautious. I think you don't want to be the first night capital in an agentic scenario, but I do think as practitioners, we need to prepare that it's going to happen, that people are going to use more and more capabilities of agents because their competitors are doing it. They're expecting the ROI is that they have to. And so what we have to do is get really good at educating how to do it. Andrew Clay Schaefer, again, one of my great friends, always says, make the right thing the easy thing.
As you can tell, John and I were on quite a roll in this episode. So we are going to continue this as a 2-part episode. Stay tuned for the second part next week. The / podcast is created by Calibrity. The / team is director and producer Ryan Wilson, editing by Steve Baradelli, marketing support by Taylor Blessing, and I'm your host, James Carman. Thanks for listening.